Hi everybody, I'm the author, Billy, and this is Antioch, Chapter 4, Lost Son. Daniel's feet dangled over the side of the treehouse. An aging afternoon lengthened the shade. He whittled a figure with his fishing knife, pausing at times to blow the shavings away. When the figure took on a rough shape, he trotted it through the air and sang, "P-p-p-pig, pig." His hands were swollen with infections from punching the tree 3 days before. His lip had a fat and nasty scab as well. Noticing the evening coming, he put the pig carving down and kicked the rope through the hole. He wanted a fire started before dark. As he descended, he felt fluid trailing down his arms and thought his bloated fingers had cracked open like sausages. He dropped to the ground, relieved to find only the scabs had broken. Bloody pus flowed from his knuckles and cuts. He wiped them on his dirty shirt. Gathering kindling was easy. It hadn't rained in days. A pile of sticks and pine cones soon waited in the stone circle for Daniel's tinderbox, a rusty canister 4 inches long and a little slimmer than his wrist. It held a shard of chipped flint, a ring of fire steel, and a hairy tuft of straw from their field. His father had given it to him and taught him how to use it. He struck the steel with the flint, sending tiny sparks of molten metal to smolder in the straw. The glow passed from there to dry pine needles and then licked to twigs, which lit the sticks within minutes. Daniel snuffed the tuft out and reloaded the box. A warm orange fire flickered in the pit. Pockets of sap snapped and hissed. Daniel had propped a useless roasting spit against the oak. He hadn't managed to catch any fish. Sitting on one of those huge roots, thinking about food and his family, hands hurting so badly he hated the rope, Daniel quit. He'd just go home, apologize, and eat. By then he'd forgotten why he'd run away in the first place. That was when he heard footfalls in the forest. He searched and called out, "Pa, is that you?" There was no answer, except for an added urgency in the approach. Horace was coming to the oak. Daniel recognized him through the lowering gloom by the size of his shadow. "Pa!" His father had never come to get him before. Horace always waited for Daniel to break. The boy smiled and thought, "Not any more. Now you're too old. You're too old and need help with the chores. Ha ha, Pa!" Daniel's smug grin narrowed into suspicion as he studied his father's stride, a staggering charge. His eyes went wide. "Drunk on some!" He shimmied up the rope, regardless of his hands. "Oh, no, you don't, Pa!" Horace grabbed the rope below, but it was too late. Daniel had reached the treehouse and pulled himself through the opening. The boy tried to bring the rope up too, but it stuck in his father's grip. Daniel scowled down at him. "Fwah! You can't get up it anyway. Even if you did, you couldn't fit through the hole. You can go on home. I'm never coming back." Daniel plopped down, folded his arms, and frowned at the rope. Horace's drunken slant showed in its tension and waver. Over a few silent minutes the boy started to imagine fishing from a raft, an oak tree for a pole, and a sea monster on the line. He narrowed his eyes and decided to wait him out, refusing to speak. After half an hour, he started to think his father had fallen asleep. Daniel tugged on the rope. Horace still held it tight. The boy went back to frowning. That night the campfire's glow came up from the hole and around the edges. The platform was like a lily pad on a pool of light, and Daniel was the toad. His wide, big-eyed frown watched the rope stay tight and wavering. He thought it was very strange. What's he doing? Is he angry? Is he sorry? He tugged the line again. "Pa?" His father had come and was down there waiting for him. It had to mean something. Despite the things said in anger, Daniel always planned on going home. Every time he'd run off before, he'd been welcomed back. So he spent much of his time away thinking about how to word his grievances upon return. Though the circumstances were odd, with his father having come to him rather than Daniel crawling home in defeat, it seemed like the right time. He gave Horace the prepared speech. "Pa, if you've got to give me a wallop, you shouldn't call it a spanky. That's disrespectful to me. I'm grown up or near there, and you shouldn't shame me like that in front of Becca. You always say to say sir and be respectful, but you should too. I don't mean calling me sir, but being respectful." As Daniel waited for a response, guilt began to replace his draining frustration. He said things before he'd been knocked out of the kitchen that night. Part of him felt he deserved a wallop. "Pa, I'm sorry about what I said the other day, about Ma. I didn't mean it." He wanted to see his father's face. He needed something other than silence. But descending the rope still felt like a bad idea. He lay down and waited for Horace to speak. Daniel woke up in the morning, in the forest's dappled light. The rope was the same, tight and wavering. It wasn't just strange anymore. It was frightening. Pa? He crawled over to the hole and looked down at his father's blank, smoking stare. A cold weight settled in his stomach. What's wrong with you, Pa? Are you sick? He bent lower to get a better look. His father pawed at him from yards below with the ignorant motion of an animal in a trap. Daniel was terrified. Over and over he cried, What's wrong, Pa? What's going on? That day passed, and the sun set without an answer. That night was a black lake around the oak. Sounds came out of everywhere to send Daniel scrambling. He was afraid any one of them might be the tell of his father climbing in the dark. His fear turned the autumn breeze into a freezing blast. It closed the platform in, so that he always felt an inch from the edge, and that his every breath threatened his fall. By sunrise, Daniel was exhausted, dehydrated, and shivering with fever. He crept over and peeked under the boards. His father was still there, holding the rope. The boy's face peeled into a silent, trembling scream that tore his lip open again. He backed up, buried his head in his knees, and sobbed. Please go away. Please, please go away. John had little trouble following Horace's trail. Trampled saplings and snapped branches made a hallway through the brush. He had an idea of where it was headed anyway. As the forest grew darker from the approaching storm, John kept calling out, Horace! A strained voice answered him suddenly from up ahead. Run! Run! He's coming! Run! John stopped and searched. Lightning flashed across the sky, thunder rumbled in behind it, and rain began to dot the path. The enormous zombie Horace crashed forward with leaves and twigs in its hair. Horace! John's face fell. He was too late. Drawing his sword, he stepped into a swing that clove a deep diagonal through his son's heart. That would have been enough to stop a man. Smoke and gore erupted from the gash, but the spine remained intact. The charging giant slammed into John, and they hit the ground with a splatter, John's right arm and sword pinned across him. Horace drove forward. John locked his left hand against the nearly severed shoulder. The wound yawned from their combined effort, tilting Horace's head and one thrashing arm away. John's eyes glowed in the belching smoke and viscera. Wynn coursed into him. He yanked his other hand free and pushed harder. Bones and tissue popped and ripped at the base of the cut. Then, with a loud, deep crack, like splintering lumber, Horace's spine broke. Ink puked out of the fissure. The monster went slack. John had folded its upper half onto its back. He squirmed out from beneath the body, drenched in blood, bile, and black. John stood up, letting the rain wash it all away. Water poured into the forest, and with a look of loss and sadness stared at what had once been Horace. Daniel squeezed the platform's edge as he ducked and wove, trying to dodge trees with his gaze, swollen hands pale from his grip. Seconds before each thunderclap, lightning exploded for a stuttering black-and-white heartbeat that let him see twice as far. He saw the golden circle first, then John jogged into view. Daniel recognized the dumpy old man for what he was, a knight of the church from Antioch. He'd seen one once before, in Moreau, a big one named Gabriel. He was also related to one he'd never met, one he knew only as his father's uncle, John. John called up to him. Are you hurt, boy? Daniel couldn't answer. Fever, deprivation, and astonishment allowed him only to stare and tremble. John ran under the platform, dashed hand over hand up the rope, and dropped to his boots on the boards. Removing his gauntlet quickly, he asked again, Are you hurt? He placed his gnarled old hand on the speechless boy's forehead. John didn't see Wynn with his eyes. He felt it like an emotion. When he touched Daniel's skin, he felt a picture of Wynn pooled around the boy's infections in small amounts, and saw where it seeped into Daniel's body from somewhere outside of perception. It only seeped in because the way was dammed. With a physical sensation, like the decision to weep, John opened the way, and Wynn blasted into Daniel. The boy's eyes rolled back in his head, and he fell unconscious, golden light flaring from his injuries. John lowered him and looked around. He found a cup among Daniel's things and filled it with rainwater from one of the canopy's steadier leaks. Then he knelt next to Daniel and woke him up. Daniel was muddled. What happened? Who are you? John handed him the cup. I'm from Antioch. My name is John. What's yours? Daniel's eyes bulged as he drank. He knew of John. That led to a cascade of more recent memories. He blinked as they came. John waited, nodding. It can take a bit to get your wits back. He took the empty cup and filled it again. How long have you been up here? You're parched. Daniel's recollection reached his father holding the rope. Of a dozen questions he wanted to ask, the first was, "Where's my pa?" John's face opened. His grandson. He should have seen it. The boy was a scrawny, bug-eyed little Horace. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, sir, I think. You're pa's uncle, aren't you? He told me Where's my pa?" John felt profound grief, the kind that builds in sudden stages as connections are made. He shoved his feelings aside to speak. "Do you know anything about a sickness in these parts, in Moreau?" "No. Pa looked sick and drunk and stayed under the tree for a long time. I thought he had the whammy. I don't know what's happening at all. Where is he?" John put a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "I'm sorry, son. Your father is dead. Daniel's mouth fell open, and he pulled away. John paused for a moment before he continued. "It's some kind of plague. People are getting sick, and when they get sick, they make other people sick too. The church is trying to help." He wanted to comfort Daniel, but he didn't know what to say. "Tell me your name, son. We're family." "Rebecca!" Daniel started to get up. "My sister! Becca's at the house. We have to go get her." John hung his head. "I've just come from the farm. I found a little girl there. How old was your sister?" "What do you mean, was? She's 5. She's only 5 years old." "Son, I'm so sorry." Daniel's grief and anger rose up in him like a viper. He looked at the sword on John's hip. His tears and words squeezed out of a tightening scowl. "What did you do to them?" John was firm. "The plague killed them. The last time you saw your father, he was already dead. I'm supposed to be in Moreau right now, but I came here instead, looking for him. I was too late. I couldn't help him and I couldn't help your sister, but I can help you, and that's what I'm going to do." Daniel slumped. John's face softened and he offered the cup again. "Please, tell me your name." "Daniel." He accepted the cup, feeling thirst then more than anything else. "Where's your mother, Daniel?" "Ma died a long time ago, when Becca was born. It was just me, Pa, and Becca." "You've no other family?" "Maybe, in Breog." "Ma was Breog." He said it like a confession. The clan's history was barbaric. John understood. He blew out a slow breath. "All right. We'll wait out the storm here. Then you're coming with me." "But what about Becca and Pa? Don't they—" "They're gone." Daniel winced. "How come you moved around if he was—" "I don't know. I've never seen anything like this before. The plague haunts the bodies like some kind of devil. It's atrocious." Daniel was lost. "We've got animals. I've got Pa's chores to do for them now." "No. You have to come with me. It isn't safe here. Your animals will just have to do their best. They aren't as important as you are." John waited, but the boy had no further arguments. "How old are you, Daniel?" 13, sir." "You're almost a man before we met." John sat down and put his legs over the edge. His chainmail grated against the planks. He waited in silence and then patted the wood, moist bits crumbling from his gauntlet. "I built this treehouse." Daniel hadn't known. John nodded. "For your father when he was a boy. I grew up here too. A long time ago all of this land was mine. It came to me because I was my father's oldest son. But when I took my vows, I gave it all to my younger brother, Isaac." "Grandpa Isaac?" John nodded hesitantly. "A little more than 18 years ago, when Isaac died. That was the last time I saw your father. We had an argument." He scratched his short, gray beard. "Fwah." Daniel sniffed and looked up at him. The old man put his hand on the boy's shoulder again. The gauntlet was wet and horrible, but Daniel didn't pull away that time. John said, "What did your father tell you about me?" "He said you're busy and important, and that's why you don't come to visit." "Did he say why he never came to see me in Antioch?" "He hardly ever left the farm. There's a lot of work to do, but if we needed to trade, he said there's less bigots in Moreau." John sighed. We were both too stubborn to apologize. Daniel couldn't remember his father ever having apologized for anything. Then his heart sank again. "The last thing I said to Pa was I hated him." John nodded sadly. "We said things like that too. Terrible things. Pa was drunk, and I got mad at him. I told him he was stupid and he should have taken Ma to have Becca in the church. I told him Ma died because of him. Death in childbirth was common outside of Antioch, and the farm was days from there by wagon. John knew an unforeseen complication during delivery would have been impossible to help. Most people's injuries and illnesses were either too serious or too minor for a long journey to see the circle. John squeezed Daniel's shoulder. Is that when you got the busted lip? Daniel reached up to his mouth and felt smooth, painless flesh. His hands were lean and strong as well, with tiny white scars over the knuckles. His aches, fever, and delirium were gone. He was still thirsty, though. John said, We all make mistakes, son. We all do things we regret. You never know if it will be the last time you see someone. Don't be too hard on yourself, or others. Daniel wiped his face with his shirt. The two of them sat there on that rotten platform, watching the storm rage through the wilderness. That is the end of Chapter 4. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can follow the link at the top of my website, www.williameharlan.com, and purchase the full novel from Amazon in ebook format for $2.99 or as a paperback for $12.99. Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for Chapter 5, The Grace.